at the University of Colorado, Boulder. And so she has been working in OSH. She's doing field work for her PhD dissertation. She will tell us what she has been doing in OSH during this presentation. And then we will have Emil Nasritdinov as a discussant. I think I will not introduce Emil, but I would like just to say that Emil has just published an article in Central Asian Survey on the production of urban space in Moscow and CASI. It's my way of changing his title. So congratulations, Emil. Even if you didn't acknowledge CASI support, you would know. I think I just checked, the cognitive maps and the acknowledgements, and I didn't see CASI. You did it.
Yeah.
Wow.
CASI comes first.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yes, thank you. Unfortunately, I didn't have a chance to read that article yet, but hopefully we'll bring some ideas into this work. So, I'm doing my research. Actually, it would actually be nice to know who you are. I know who's here now, but since we're such a small group, if you could just introduce yourself really quickly, that would be helpful.
Well, my name is Antoine. I'm from Canada. Actually, I'm working for the IOM, International Organization for Migration. And the reason I'm there is just because I did a presentation in Daniela's classroom, because we involved her students in one of our research projects, and there was this conference, so I decided to stay and listen.
Hi, I'm Danira, and I'm teaching at Journalism and Mass Communications Department, Research Methods, Senior Thesis Seminar, writing, academic writing, and I recently finished my PhD in sociology in journalism, and also working as a consultant for IOM.
Oh, great. Okay. I just realized I'm going to record myself talking,
So,
just in case.
my name is Elena Jackson. Besides being the director of CASI, I'm an anthropologist. I've done field work in Kyrgyzstan. Nearly all of it in rural areas. So, I've been working on plenty of topics. But at my age, I do intend to move to the city, so I'm more than interested in urban anthropology.
I think I have seen some of your work actually, so yeah. And are you teaching or?
So I'm also a colleague of Svetlana at CASI from University of Kulova. I'm also teaching in the politics department here.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm interested in urban politics and kind of took part in a project last year with the local organization, an arts initiative called Shtab.
Yeah. You've heard of them.
So yeah.
Okay.
Looking forward to the presentation.
Okay. Great. And one more.
So I'm is an anthropology student.
Okay.
I'm junior.
You're a junior.
Yeah,
Okay.
anthropology partner.
Excellent. Geography and anthropology have many things in common, so I think hopefully you'll find this interesting. Okay, so today I'm going to make what is really my first attempt at pulling together a little bit of the field work that I've been doing in OSH for my dissertation. And the title of my talk is The Production of Urban Space in OSH, Preliminary Results from Neighborhood Walks and Resident Interviews. I want to highlight the word preliminary, but at the same time I think that I can draw some interesting conclusions. And as we were discussing just now, the title of the talk, The Production of Urban Space, is not just meant to be cute, it's actually meant to index a fairly influential So I will try to bring some of his theory into my lecture as we go on. And I just want to thank everybody at CASI and at AUCA for having me and for supporting this work, because my research is funded through the U.S. Student Fulbright Program, but CASI wrote a letter of support for me, and I think that that was probably quite influential in the final decision. So, let's see. And has everyone here been to Osh? Do you? So I didn't know who my audience was, but even if you've been there and you live in Kyrgyzstan, and I'm a geographer, I love to look at sort of the map of the south of Kyrgyzstan, but we can skip through that. So there's Osh. My research sits at the confluence of three different fields within geography or within the social sciences. It sits between critical development geographies, post-socialism and development, or we could call that post-socialist transformations as well, and geographies of urban development. And I sort of see them as in this order, and I view Osh as kind of sitting in the middle there. I'm trying to look at Osh in a new way. I think that the common story that most of us know about the city is a city that has a history of violent death and conflict. And I don't know, I guess I'm kind of tired of reading stories about that way of seeing Osh. It's not that doesn't exist, it's just that I think that looking at Osh in a new way can help us understand some of the dynamics and ways that don't essentialize ethnicity and make violence seem as if it's a natural part of what happens in the south of the country. One of my research assistants, and I should say that I'm working with 3 university students from INFAC, and they're all wonderful. And they're a mix of different ethnicities and genders. They all speak so many different languages, and their insights are absolutely amazing. And one of them said to me, the country commemorates the day of the massacre. I think it's April 7th, right? During the first revolution in Kyrgyzstan. Is that what it was?
But don't call it massacre.
Second revolution.
Second revolution. What is it called? And she said, in the People's Revolution, maybe 100 people died on the square, but in Osh, many, many more people died in 2010, and nobody in the north understands why it happened. They dismiss it as, a conflict that happened between Uzbeks and Kyrgyz, and they're kind of wild and crazy people down there, and it's not a part of our national history. But and she was arguing that it should be, and I think she's absolutely right. So from within critical development geographies, in geography we look at development in a number of different ways. We're really focused on the way that development programs are manifest spatially, and we think about development as consisting of both what we call big D and little d development, what that means is sort of the mainstream development interventions, interventions that are coming from the World Bank and the IMF, but also through NGOs, through USAID. And little d development is the harnessing of capitalist processes for the purposes of those mainstream development institutions. So you can also think of that as sort of the neoliberalization of international aid. Development is seen as a Western project of economic and political intervention, and it's usually traced to the end of the Second World War. So this is when mainstream development really becomes a thing that Western countries are promoting abroad, right? And these interventions are serving as vehicles for promoting capitalist processes in not quite capitalist spaces. Therefore, geographers are concerned with patterns in the circulation and accumulation of capital, and we see that as manifest spatial and uneven. So the accumulation of capital is happening at different scales. We're interested in how it happens at different scales and how it's happening unevenly across the globe. So, for example, some countries are richer than others, and the degree of dependency and the economic links between countries is the type of thing we might look at, but then we might also look at within a country, how do you disaggregate to look at where wealth is concentrated. And you can do that at any scale, right? So you can do it at the urban scale as well. So throughout this talk, I'm going to use the word development in its dual sense as both big D or mainstream development and this sort of imminent little d capitalist processes. More recently, this view of development is being brought to bear on post-colonial approaches to understanding development, which are concerned with tracing and challenging the systems of knowledge, the production of knowledge, and the ways of knowing the world that the social sciences inherited from the colonial experience and that continue to, I think, influence the way that we look at what's going on across the world. So geographers are expanding and applying many of these ideas from post-colonial theories into development geography to think about how places are produced by global processes, how places are created or made through these circulations of knowledge, of capital, of all sorts of other things. And also how places are articulated with and rework those same global processes in new and unexpected ways. And so that's one of the more important framings of my work and what I hope to look at ocean in those terms. One very obvious way that development studies development has been studied in post-socialist countries is through the application and also the heavy critique of the transitology paradigm. So probably most of you are familiar with transitology, especially as it was adopted in the early 1990s in Eastern Europe and Russia, and to some degree also in Central Asia. This is most commonly associated with shock therapy programs that were reducing social funding, and it had pretty disastrous consequences for many, many citizens in this part of the world. Transitology is characterized by a set of grossly simplified misunderstandings about societies that are in transition, and I want to highlight the difference between the language of transition and transformation, because this transitology paradigm emphasizes that the newly independent countries of the Soviet Union are on a transition path, right, from a command economy, from communism to free market democracy, right? And those two things always go together: free market capitalism and democracy. So this sort of linear teleological view of political and social change is still really, I think, that we see that in most mainstream media accounts of what's going on in Central Asia and in other post-socialist countries as well. And one could say that transitology and shock therapy embody this sort of big D and little d development, because they were promoted explicitly by the World Bank and the IMF, and they were trying to harness free market principles for the economic growth of countries, and economic growth was really central to that. But the application of development geography to post-socialist societies doesn't really go much further than that, and unfortunately I think that there's just not that many development geographers working in post-socialist countries, and I think that's due to a number of reasons, but I'll mention them in just a minute, but two authors, Stenning and Hirschelman, I think that probably some of you know them quite well, argue that some places in the world are seen as places where we should develop theories about how the rest of the world should function. and other places in the world are seen as testing sites for those macro theories. And for the most part, those macro theories are developed in the West, and Europe, and America, and then we see if they work in other places. So Stenny and Hirschelman are arguing that actually maybe we need to reverse that process and try to figure out how the world is working from within, as I said in my abstract, the periphery of the periphery, right? Let's look at what's going on in these places and try to learn what that tells us about the center of power in the world, right? So why have geographers not been, development geographers in particular, not been that engaged in understanding post-socialist transformations? I think it's due to two reasons. First, the opening of socialist societies to wider study in 1991 coincided with a term within critical development study called post-development scholarship. And this was primarily exemplified by a guy named Arturo Escobar, who declared that development is dead. He said, we need to reject this entire paradigm of development in favor of other social movements because development itself has been hijacked by the elite of the world to simply further their own interests. And it has nothing to do with poverty or poor people or any of the other good things it claims to do. And it's framed in these neutral terms, but actually development is so political that we can't strip it of we can't strip it of its associations with power, I guess. So at the time that scholarship was opening up in the former Soviet Union, critical development geography just wasn't in a place to really move there and look at it. On the other hand, I think that the category second world, because the category of the second world disappeared when the Soviet Union collapsed. And I don't know how many of you know, but the reason that we refer to poor countries as third world countries is because of this division in the world between first, second, and third. And the third world was just a non-aligned movement. It had nothing to do with economic prosperity. So the disappearance of this second world category sort of set post-socialist countries simply outside of the imaginary of those who critically study development within geography. So where did the second world fit? It's now on its way towards capitalism, and there's a bunch of other really poor countries in Latin America and Africa, so development geographers were focused there. Furthermore, the study of development in post-socialist societies continues to be chilled through the metaphor of the enduring legacy of the socialist past. This normative phrase is code for the leftover baggage that impedes so-called properly functioning democracies and economies. For example, the leftover institutions, people's attitudes towards change, and Western forms of social organization like NGOs. I think that this actually impedes how we see post-socialist countries today. We think of them too much as being post-socialist, and it's 25 years on, more than 25 years on. I'm not arguing that the Soviet legacy is not important, but I think that it's a narrative that is so encompassing that it leaves little room for thinking about post-socialist countries in other ways. So we have these two narratives about post-socialist change. One is that socialism is the baggage that these countries now have to deal with as they move towards the future, and the second narrative is this post-socialism as a transition in a forward direction towards democratic markets, democracy and free markets, right? So together, these two stories combine to produce an enduring image of post-socialist countries as located somewhere between dictatorship and democracy, somewhere between command economy and the free market. But in this understanding, the reasons that hinder achievement of progress along that ladder are rooted in the socialist past. And these are the kinds of accounts that are, I think, stuck within journalistic explanations, especially, and the popular Western imagination of the region. But there's a lot of wonderful scholarship, and especially really close readings and ethnographies of the post-socialist transformation that doesn't directly engage with critical development geography, but it could, or we could start to engage with it. For example, I'm just going to take two examples. Gerald Creed and Catherine Verder have worked, studied the resistance of villagers to the decollectivization and the transition to sort of the liberal framework of transformations. Okay, those words mixed up now. In Poland and Bulgaria. So Catherine Verder shows that Polish villagers were marching against the government's liberalizing programs, and they were embracing their peasant identities within their protest movement. So those peasant identities were actually nurtured under socialism and as part of their identity within the collective farm. So they mobilized that identity as peasants in making their claims to land. We are peasants, we belong to the land. But Gerald Creed, in his study in Bulgaria, shows that villagers resisted their loss of collective farms and made their claims about the land by articulating a fear of being reduced to merely peasants. So, Creed, in writing about this we found very different things about the same process. You would have expected to find the same. He asked, how should we interpret these cases? Should we see them as forms of resistant socialism or as socialist resistance? And the difference between those two terms is really far from rhetorical. The former, resistant socialism, is the mainstream way of viewing post-socialist citizenry as traditional and pig-headedly reluctant to change. The latter, socialist resistance, elegantly and simply reframes the view in a way that empowers the voice and actions of post-socialist citizens as modern and rational political actors responding to uncertainty in the world. And I think that I gave that example because we need more of this work, and I think especially in Central Asia. So a lot of this, in particular, post-colonial frameworks have been called upon to reframe the epistemic of post-socialism. What is post-socialism? Is it post-colonial? Does it have something in common with other post-colonial societies in the traditional sense? Right? What I'm hitting you hard with a lot of sort of theory. I want to put some images in your heads of Osh, and then I want to get back to the third circle, geographies of urban development. So when I arrived in Osh at the end of September, they were the mayor's office was madly trying to finish this bridge that has been under construction for at least 2 years, but I think probably 3 years. This bridge was initially started, it's at the bazaar. You can see Suleimanto, the mountain in the background on the left. The bottom picture is when I had first arrived at Osh in September, and the top is a few days before the bridge was officially opened. And you can see the difference. Of course, it's a pretty beautiful road, and there are problems. I know that there have been blogs that document all the cracks and what's wrong with the bridge, but actually it's a decent bridge and it really alleviates traffic in the city. On the same day that the bridge was opened, the mayor of Osh the president visited to open the bridge, a little 2-lane bridge in Osh, and the president flies down to open it. I mean, I think that speaks enormous. It says a lot about how important this bridge was. So here's a guy painting, trying to beautify the area around the bridge right before it's opening. And this bridge has a really interesting history that maybe we can talk about a little bit later. But essentially, the former mayor of Osh, who was forced out of office by the government in 2013, destroyed the old bridge that was here without any funding to rebuild it. And rumor has wanted to find a way to fund the construction of the new bridge, and the only way to do so was to destroy this one and hope that somebody would come through with some funding at some point. Who knows whether it's true or not, but I was told that by a fairly dependable journalist. So here's more, I think that the bridge was opened officially on October 30th, something like that. I mean, this must be literally 4 days before the bridge opened, and the road isn't even paved yet. I mean, they were really rushing to finish it. And in order to build the new bridge and some of the other new roads that line that are alleviating traffic jams in the city. So here's a beautiful new road, and they had to displace a number of older sections of the city. These are Uzbek mahallas, Uzbek neighborhoods, and this is just, it still looks like this. It's not everywhere, but in one interview I had in this neighborhood, the AUCA of the neighborhood said, today there are about 250 households in my mahalla. There used to be 600. Used to be 5 years ago 600. So dramatic change. This is a beautiful artistic rendering of the future modern Mosh. This was a poster near the bridge somewhere. You look at the messages sending to people in the ocean. I love this moving highway. It's really my favorite part. And I use this picture in some of my interviews, and I ask people what they think about it. And I mean, if you just look in the background, they're high-rise buildings. I mean, this is modernity. This is what the future of Boulder should look like. And it's even though I'm doing a project on urban development, the actual changes to the city are very small. The only new buildings that have been constructed really are one or two, maybe I have photos of them, one or two private apartment buildings and some housing for the victims of the 2010 conflict. There's about 15 large apartment blocks in the city. Here's some other sort of what's going on in public spaces. This is the Peace Bell, but the Peace Bell was stolen, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago. I never saw it. There's a geographer actually named Ellie Harwell, who's written a wonderful piece about memory and forgetting of public monuments, and she writes about this space. This is directly across from the mayor's office. This is behind the mayor's office. This is the children's park, which is being commodified into a place for weddings, and they're just to the side of these yurts with big hearts kind of made of metal on the side. I think it's hideous, but when I talk to people, they say they like it. So this is a new apartment building. It's called the Turецкая башня, the Turkish tower. And it really dominates the skyline. And you can see the new road. This actually maybe the new bridge is a little bit this way. But this is right behind these tall buildings. There's some mahallas and beautiful views from up there. It's locked, but of course it's really easy to walk inside. And I haven't actually talked to anybody who lives here yet, but I plan to do so. And it's really not a very high quality building. It's only been there for maybe 3 years, and it's really falling apart. This is, I think, what most people think about when they think of Boulder is the history of violence and conflict. This is a map from ACTED. ACTED made the map for UNHCR, I guess. And it's just shows the density of destroyed buildings or partially damaged buildings. So here's Suleiman, the mountain, and most of the destruction happened along the main arteries, and then in some other so-called mixed neighborhoods. This is Chiyamashki, and up here towards, I guess that's Bush Street. I'm not too sure what that's called. And I'm going to show you a photo in a minute of the main road leading out of the city. It actually goes east those murals that I'm going to show you right here. So this is some of the destruction that happened in the mahalas. I believe this one is on Mahayi Street. This is when I visited in 2013. They were just beginning to build some of this. The state directorate, which took responsibility for overseeing the majority of the reconstruction of the city, built these buildings for victims of the conflict. They were supposed to house both Uzbek and Kyrgyz victims, but I believe they're mostly housing Kyrgyz victims. This is the new entrance to the city, which is what I was showing you on the map of the destruction. You can see the Turkish Bashnia in the background. And this used to be a tiny little road through a mahala. It was difficult to navigate in taxis. And today you see this it's a beautiful but fairly nationalistic mural. It has a lot of images of yurts and nomadic Kyrgyz people, and just behind it is an Uzbek mahala. So there's sort of an image. Okay, so let's get back to geographies of the urban. I just showed you a bunch of pictures of violence. Maybe I shouldn't have done that, or I should have complemented them with others, because I really do think it's important to move beyond a view of OSHA as the geography of violence and fear. OSHA is more than just a spatial container for these memories of trauma. And I argue that the urban in OSHA is a fundamental way of thinking about oneself and one's future. And that's not just my argument. I'm drawing from Morgan Liu, who is one of my advisors, who wrote a book called Under Solomon's Throne about mahalas and OSH. Based on fieldwork conducted before the 2010 riots, many years of fieldwork, Liu argues that urban identity, which is centered on life and the material form of the mahala, is essential to Uzbek conceptions of self and one's place in Kyrgyzstan more broadly. He says, urban place was something to think with for Uzbeks. Uzbeks living in Osh treat urban places as frameworks for making sense of the world and potentially for acting on it. They think with their city in certain moments to make sense of their perplexing post-Soviet situation, characterized by their uncertain place in the world. They interpret their predicament through the concrete spaces of everyday urban life. In other words, how we dwell in space matters in how we conceive of the world. What he's referring to here, this, their predicament is this idea that Uzbeks in the south of Kyrgyzstan are not welcome within Uzbekistan itself, feel embattled within the south, in their homeland, and so they live in between. That's what he's referring to. So I agree that in Osh, the urban is a fundamental way of thinking about oneself and one's future. I think that's true for most citizens of most cities. But I want to expand on that view to understand what the urban means, not just for Uzbeks, but for all groups in the city. And to look at it from different perspectives, to disaggregate it by gender and age and things like that. The majority of Osh's Kyrgyz citizens settled in the city's newer microrayon districts during the Soviet period. First as part of forced sedentarization programs, and then with migration rising in the 1980s as Khrushchev relaxed many of his registration policies, and then further accelerating with the collapse of the Soviet Union. As relative newcomers to the city from the mountainous and rural countryside, Osh's Kyrgyz residents arrived in search of education, economic opportunity, and an urban way of life, and they continue to do so. Thus, while microrayon and mahala consist of very different physical environments and lived experiences, they similarly serve as indexes for thinking about and exercising concepts of identity, belonging in the nation, and imaginations of a prosperous future. Moreover, both of these urban forms, mahala and microrayon, are no less the objects of state and international development initiatives that alternatively aim to either build the nation, to create economic opportunity in the name of preventative development and conflict mitigation, and and so forth. Being an urban dweller has a particular meaning in post-socialist cities. Urban development in the Soviet period was not just about economic restructuring. It was the primary means of creating a new and progressive kind of society. So the urban was at once seen as an undesirable product of capitalist and even feudal relations within Marxist theory, and it held out the possibility for a new spatial arrangement of society. So these were hotly debated topics in the 1920s and 1930s when city planners aimed at creating an anti-urban that would mirror an anti-capitalist society. So what the Soviet Union was trying to do socially was also explicitly part of their urban development plans. Let me skip through some of this stuff. So a Soviet city's general plan was therefore as much an ideological tool for achieving a desired social outcome as it was an economic plan. Importantly, this was broadly understood by Soviet citizens and city residents who viewed themselves as urban dwellers, participating in a great transformation of life and politics. The city was viewed as an expression of the legitimate social relation between people and state, expressed through its physical infrastructure. And here I am citing Catherine Alexander, for those of you who may know her. On the other hand, there is an explicit tension in socialist urban life between ideology and the pragmatics of actually living. Soviet urban dwellers did not uncritically accept the changes happening in cities, and while overarching ideologies of Soviet development and progress were tied to the experience of living in the city, housing shortages were common, communal living was a source of endless frustration. Moreover, most of the general plans were almost never fully realized, and most cities in the Soviet Union were eventually declared de facto socialist cities, even though they hadn't fully attained the goals of the general plan. So, in other words, the Soviet Union failed to remake the city. And this is what brings me to Henri Lefebvre and the idea for the social, or excuse me, not the social, but just the production of urban space. Because Henri Lefebvre, who was working in France, and during the socialist, I'm not going to try and explain it because it's been a while since I looked at his work, but he was an architect and engineer, and he was also an anthropologist and a social theorist, and he wrote prolifically and was really engaged in social movements in which factory workers and students were trying to take control back of the city from the corporate world, from the elite of Paris and so forth. And he observed that the Soviet Union may have failed because it failed to produce a new kind of urban experience. And it's possibly, it's an exaggeration, but I think it's an interesting observation. Let's see. So I think that the ways that the urban serves as a conceptual vehicle for Osh residents, according to Morgan Liu's work, reflects the way that Lefebvre also viewed urban space. He said that the urban is a social reality constructed as much by thought as by architects, planners, and engineers. So the way we think about ourselves existing and belonging to this space is important. Furthermore, Lefebvre saw the urban as fundamentally tied into global capitalist processes, the circulation of capital and accumulation. So he said that the urban was the central intermediary between the forces of state-promoted capitalism and the everyday. And he thought that social struggle and conflict are irreducibly spatial within the urban scale. And so, of course, we have a Bush, and we have a city with a history of conflict, and a city that's been very, very much affected by investment in the Soviet period. And I think that there's a lot of reason that Lefebvre can be useful in thinking through Osh. see. Okay. So what I've been doing, well, my main goal was to do a set of semi-structured interviews and walking interviews, or what I called mobile ethnography in English. And semi-structured interviews, so the numbers are what I've done so far. They're fairly straightforward. I use the snowball sampling method. It's what I did when I first got to USH, and I'm continuing to do them occasionally, but I'm finding that this method is actually not getting me where I wanted to go. I want to talk a little bit about walking interviews. So what I really hoped to do was to ask residents in USH to take me on a tour of their neighborhood. And the idea is that as a researcher and a research participant are walking through a space together, it generates a new kind of knowledge about what's going on in that space that you wouldn't get by sitting across from one another. But what I found is that it's hard to convince people to give me a tour of their neighborhood. It's just a weird question to ask. They don't understand what I want them to do, so I've only done 3 of them. And these are with good friends. So what I've done instead is something in between these 2 methods that wasn't an original part of my research project, but I think that this is going to get me into more walking interviews, and this is what I've started to call neighborhood walkthroughs. So a research assistant and I pick a place on the map and go there and spend 3 hours wandering around, chatting with people that we meet on the street, sitting in chaykhanas, trying to talk to as many people as we can. And it's a really interesting experience, and as I've done this more and more, I think that I'm getting much better looking at the city. There's also all sorts of primary data collection. We're going to look at a few maps now, and then I'm going to show you, talk about some of the results of some of these neighborhood visits. This is a map of the 13 Tir-Soviet territorial councils. This is the sort of administrative division of the city. To be very honest with you, most citizens don't know which Tir-Soviet they live in. And it's not a very natural way of dividing the city or thinking about the city. Even people who were involved with the production of this map don't know what Tir-Soviet they live in, which I think is funny. This map is funded by the Soros Foundation, an NGO that I've been working with called Youth of USH, hired a consulting company from Moscow to do research on social capital, and that's what this is. And it's a really interesting report. It's definitely on the Soros Kyrgyzstan website, but it may also be on the Youth of USH website. I put it up here because what I wanted to highlight was how weird the city boundaries of USH are. I mean, you have all these little exclaves hanging out, and one of the things, and you know, this map, I mean, this was published in 2015, and I think if you had tried to produce this map 2 years earlier, some of these territories wouldn't have been part of the map, or not part of the city, and there are a number of new proposals to sort of annex new parts of Karasuski rayon into the city limits of USH. Some people see this as sort of gerrymandering to reduce the number of Uzbek votes vis-a-vis Kyrgyz votes, and some people say, well, no, this is in order to collect more tax money from, you know, richer populations. There's lots of reasons proposed. What I want you to do, I'm going to switch to another map now. I'm going to switch back and forth. This is, I switched the order of my slides, so I'm not going to do that. Okay, this is the Gen Plan. This is from the Gen Plan, the General Plan for USH. It was supposed to, it was never approved, and I should say that just getting this document was kind of a minor victory for me because I have the whole game plan now. I don't know if you've seen it or not. It's semi-public. The game plan has been a subject of sort of secrecy for many years. It was never approved by Parliament. I guess Parliament has to approve the game plan. And apparently the reason that it was never approved is because of this question of the annexation of additional territories. And so that was one of the major impediments to trying to move it through. So today there is still no game plan, but there are all sorts of, very non-specific documents about Bush. But so this is just a more detailed view of this, right? And if you focus on Aktilek, for example, this is Sulemancho and the river here. So if you focus on that brown square of Aktilek, you can compare the two maps. This is Aktilek right here. There's housing all over this place. The territorial limits of the city make absolutely no sense. And I wanted to show you that by juxtaposing these two maps. You can see all sorts of other neighborhoods that are also not part of the city limits, so everything in this kind of lightish pink color is not included. Okay. So now what I want to do is just go through some examples. So I have a lot of data. It's not well sorted and organized right now. So I would have loved to give you better ethnographies of all these different sites, but the best that I could do is to map them and put some photos up. So I will just describe them. Hubkuk is the, I actually don't know what the BUS stands for. Does anybody know? So the cotton paper factory. Yeah. In grain. So this is the site of the former cotton factory. It's defunct and enormous and kind of fun to wander around. But across the street from the cotton factory is a very, very large microrayon district that's known for being monoethnically Kyrgyz. But I think what's more important about that district is that this is where most of the new migrants to the city now live, and students. So this is definitely a poor neighborhood of the city. Nobody seems to stay here very long. No one seems to want to buy property here. There are lots of buildings that are dormitories, but dormitories for families. As a kind of social assistance. Let's see. This in the green circle is Gyelogodok, which is definitely not really in the center of the city. It's if you drive out of the city a ways, you get into a really peaceful kind of neighborhood that the rhetoric that I'd heard about Gyelogodok is that it's a mixed Machala microrayon district. But when you show up, there's not really that many microrayons or apartment blocks. It's mostly private homes. But these are two photos from the Soviet Geological Expedition Museum in Gyelogodok. And if anyone ever goes to Osh, I highly recommend visiting the museum because it's just an interesting thing to do. And I was, as a geographer, really excited to see this giant map. At sort of the height of its work in the 1970s, there were 2,000 scientists and administrative staff working in this institution. And today there are maybe 100. And at the time, it hosted interns from Moscow who were coming to help map the geological resources of Central Asia. And it had responsibility for all of Central Asia, not just Kyrgyzstan, not just the south. And Gyelogodok is often cited to me in my interviews as a place where there's interethnic harmony. And I think that this history of the sort of academic investment by the Soviet period, during the Soviet period, is maybe a story that's not told as often, but probably more important because it highlights the degree to which class overlays ethnicity, and so probably there's peace here because people are rich. I mean, I guess that's what I'm trying to say. So let's see, Ona Dira or Amir Timur, unfortunately don't have photos. I do, but they're in many different places. But this is a primarily Uzbek neighborhood that sits above the river. Right below the river, you have Akadem Garadok, which is where a number of universities, Oshtu and Oshku and lots of others, are sort of spread out along this river. It's a big student city. And then there's almost a cliff, and up here in the hills, you have this sprawling kind of new Uzbek neighborhood. And most of the people who live here, well, I think what I've learned is that this neighborhood was originally established during the 1970s when the Soviets built microrayon districts in the center. And so most of these people are people who have already once been displaced from somewhere in Ash. Okay, this is Oshki Rayon. I had a very interesting interview in this apartment block, actually. Right behind Oshki Rayon is a mahala, so you have like the juxtaposition of these two really right next to each other, very close. And Oshki Rayon is also a place where, when these were built, that's where people were sent to Onadir. I spoke to some Uzbek ladies who were sitting outside the day before Nowruz, and they had a basement floor apartment and had sort of formed this big garden, and we had this interesting conversation about the 2010 events, and sort of the sad news is that one of the women lost her son and husband during the events. But she also claimed that some of her Kyrgyz neighbors who gave her away during those events still live in this building next to her. And she said that she hasn't received any compensation of any kind from the state. We talked, and then another friend of theirs walked over from the nearby Mahala to visit, and this woman sat down with us, and we had a resident of Mahala and a resident of Microrayon district sitting together, and this nice conversation started about the differences between the two. And the key thing that gets repeated to me frequently is that these kinds of apartment blocks, you don't know your neighbors because you have to lock your door. And in a Mahala, you know your neighbors. Everyone's door is open. And this is just the common trope about the difference between housing type and Osh. It's about trust, and it's about whether you can leave your door unlocked. I think that's really interesting. This neighborhood is, again, I had very recently another very interesting interview with a Kyrgyz man who was tending his sheep in sort of an empty lot. This is called Amir Timur, and it was set up right after the 1990 ethnic riots in Osh. So not 2010, but 20 years before. And this guy was involved in the protest movement in a protest movement that sought to secure land from the government because as the Soviet Union was collapsing, these people saw that housing is being privatized, people are getting their property in their own name, but the Kyrgyz people who are still nomadic don't have anything. And so they protested, and they were given this plot of land. And so this area is, so it was established then, and now it's a beautiful place. All of the roads are nicely paved, there's nice canals everywhere, very rich houses, fancy houses. And if you compare that to Onadir, for example, Onadir has no paved roads. They have irregular water supply, things like that. It's an interesting juxtaposition, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. I think it's interesting that this area was given to people. I'm going to skip that one for now. This is along Navayi Street. Just at the base of Suleimanto, this is part of the UNESCO World Heritage Site. Very recently in the news, there have been reports that UNESCO again wants to clean the base of the mountain. And I think this happens occasionally, that there are threats that people who live at the base of the mountain are going to lose their homes. Right after the 2010 events, UNESCO issued a public statement that said, we deride the destruction of mahalas at the base of the mountain. These mahalas are important for the overall look of the mountain and the feel and the character. It's interesting. If you also look, you see that like a major part of this neighborhood is not part of this, not in the city district. Even though this is the new bridge, so that's clearly downtown. It's very central, but those people have to apply to CASI district for all of their services. And in the photo here, you can see that's Navayi Street, and you see kind of shiny new roofs. That's where houses were destroyed. I think I'm going to stop there. How long have I been going? An hour? Enough. Yeah. I think I'm going to stop there. That's what's next. Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Now, Emil will say a few words.
Yeah, I'm very happy to, because first of all, I was born and I grew up in Osh. It's my hometown. I really like it. I love it. I also worked there as an architect for 3 years, and I did. I was not engaged with the master plan, with the general plan myself, but I did at least a couple of maps created for our company, for different universities. So it was quite something that is true. And just for the audience, I didn't have a chance to read the results, but I read the proposal and found it again very interesting. And I found the way that you construct your argument again very complex, and I really like how you approach it from different angles, and with the smart scale approach, and and so just a couple of sort of comments, questions. The first one is that I really like is the way that you discuss this contradiction between urban identity. On the one hand, where Uzbeks who are traditional residents of Osh and who consider themselves as urbanites, are in fact perceived by, again, were perceived by Soviets to some degree, and today also by the new states, by our new government and by the city administration, perceived as something that is very traditional, conservative, and thus the opposite of urban. And how Kyrgyz, who are really newcomers to the city, that have never lived in the city for a very long time, but just because they live in these micro-regions, they are perceived as urbanites. And so there is this interesting contradiction. And the way out of this is, I think, what I was thinking you could include it is that while we're discussing quite a lot of Soviet urban history, right? There is not much of going beyond threats and sort of discussing the urban history of Central Asia in the pre-Soviet times, which is very long and have a lot of sort of legacies.
Pre-Soviet times.
Yeah, pre-Soviet times. And AUCA is like very old time, right? And sort of these mahalas were established way later, many centuries before the Soviets came, right? And so if we also incorporate that discussion, what it means to be urban from the traditional long-term historical perspective, right? Then, sort of the position of Uzbeks gains more power in the city. The second thing that I think is slightly missing in this discussion, right, is the position of like real urbanites, like, in the sense that people who were born in the city and who also who used to live, and many of them still live in these metro regions. Right? These are like Russians, Tatars, and many Kyrgyz and Uzbeks also who were not living in the mahalat, right, but living in their apartment buildings. Right? And for some reasons, somehow, they were left out in the discourse, on what it means to be urban. Right? Because if you look at this, this would be the main discussion, what it means to be urban, right? The conflict between the traditional urbanites and the newcomers. Right? And so I wish, and maybe there's still time to also incorporate the perspective of those. Like my parents, they basically, I was born in this apartment in 1970. I was born. We moved in the apartment where my parents lived in 1976. Right? So 40 years, no, 50, for 40 years, right? Exactly 40 years. Right? And so they lived in this place for a very long time, and they still live in the same apartment. They lived in one place for 40 years, and we still have a lot of neighbors who are from that apartment. Right? So so incorporating that perspective would be interesting. And then it would be also interesting to see, to go a little bit further into history, again, in the discussion of place systems. For example, this children's park that you have showed, that in the past used to be a lake. During the same times, right? It used to be a lake. It was called Komsomolskaya ozero, right? And like my parents used to go swimming in it. And when we were born, it was already filled up. Right? But still, sort of lots of these places, sort of their history does not start from the period of independence. Right? So they have much longer history. I was wondering, but also, if you've heard any discussion, you have to say, of these new apartment buildings, they are mostly, which were built after the conflict, with the help of different government agencies, how they are mostly inhabited by Kyrgyz. But I remember when they were just built, there was a lot of talk of how they would be mixed. There would be one apartment which is Uzbek, and then the one which is next to it would be Kyrgyz, right? And what happened to that policy? Did the Uzbeks later sell their houses, apartments to Kyrgyz? Or so what happened? Why there is no mixture there anymore? And also one interesting thing that is, how you, at least in the proposal, you describe these policies, UNESCO's policies of heritage preservation. It's not, but and in some ways you're opposing to the Soviet policy of modernization, Soviet urban development. Or maybe not.
No.
Yeah, because in the Soviet time, sort of this conservation policy was very similar. Right? And again, this whole territory, right, under Suleiman right, was also a type of cultural heritage. Okay. Yeah, the one where this mosque is between the Avatar and between the mountain and the library. So that area was preserved during the Soviet times. Right? So this UNESCO policy is not new. It's sort of built on what has some degree left from the Soviet Union. And just a couple of more comments. Sort of this, in regards to methodology, I was thinking that maybe Mahira can also contribute a little bit because they did quite a lot of similar studies using this method of photo drift. How people just wander around and take pictures of everything that they see, right? And if anything from that experience can relate to your experience of doing your neighborhood walks. And the last part, it's more on conceptual, on the theoretical framework, right? And I really like the way that you criticize transitology, right? And that perspective to what is happening in Central Asia. And so this big question then is, like, what does your research, what you have conducted, say about, what does it have to contribute to this perspective? Right? If we avoid this linear perspective of transition from socialism to capitalism, from planning to market economy, right? What does your research, what does the case of Bosch tell us about the transition, the transformation? I just happened to finish my own paper on process of transformation in Bishkek, and for my own research, I'm using Gilles Deleuze, the concept of default, right? And sort of how he talks about how spaces fold and unfold. He talks about the sort of infinite variations of possible developments, right? And he criticizes, he's the post-structuralist, and he criticizes this structural approach where you see, let's say, transition from one structure to another structure, from capitalism to socialism to capitalism, etc. And he talks about this metaphysical basis as the primary driving force of the transition. Right? And sort of, I was really wondering, like, once you have conducted this research, what is it? What kind of new perspective are you bringing, putting on the table in regards to this transitology? So, you don't answer all of it.
Should I answer questions, or should I one at a time? Or yeah, I think
not so many people.
So I have not read Deleuze or Guattari, and so I actually don't know much about their work. And that's a great question. I mean, how is my research contributing to a critique of the sort of transition paradigm, right? I think that if you look at what is producing urban space in Osh, you have different processes at different scales. You have global things going on. People are sending less money back to Osh now because they're coming home from Russia. So there's less investment in private homes. There's the state that is investing in its national symbols all over the place still, especially in parks and things like that. I see the city as like the sort of manifestation of these different processes, and they're not, I think that what I'm trying to do is to say different both economic and social processes are happening in Osh that sorry, I'm losing track of what I'm trying to say, that are different. I mean, this is not just neoliberalism, which is kind of now what we say about capitalism today, but actually neoliberalism is manifest in all sorts of different ways too. So what is it that's happening there? What do we call it? I mean, you have so many different layers. And I guess I'm trying to complicate some of those stories. It's not just about the Kyrgyz nation state, forcing its view of the world onto a city that doesn't quite fit, right? It's about all sorts of other global processes, like remittances, like the World Bank is sending people from the Osh Mayor's office to South Korea to learn about urbanization, which I think is ridiculous. But I don't know if Korea has much to do with what's happening in Osh, unless you want it to look like that picture up there. But I don't know if that answers your question completely. And maybe that's one of those big questions I won't be able to answer until I write a dissertation.
This is actually the Osh is so different.
Yeah.
It is a completely different path from Bishkek.
Yeah.
It is already the manifestation of beginnings.
Yeah. And in my questions, in the semi-structured interviews, and it's a question I use in walking interviews too, is Osh different? If so, how does it compare to other cities? And many people say, well, Osh is an Asian city. And I push and I say, what does Asian city mean? And, they have trouble defining exactly what that means, but it's interesting. I mean, it means that they see Bishkek as a European city for sure, but they don't think Osh is like other cities in Kyrgyzstan either. And it's not like Andijan, it's not like Tashkent either. So, there's this sort of world cities literature. Jennifer Robinson is trying to push back against the model of London and New York as places where exciting things happen, and this is where we generate most of urban theory, and she's trying to look at more ordinary cities. It's actually the title of her book is Ordinary Cities, and she talks about the way that policymakers try to emulate the development of their city on these examples. How is Singapore developing? How is Rio developing? Or what's happening in New York? But I don't really hear that type of narrative yet. And maybe it's because actually not that much is happening in English. Maybe Mirza Khalid had a better vision. He would have expressed something different. I think that's a great comment about the real urbanites, like the people who have lived in the urban places for a long time. But I would also push back and say I think that people who live in private houses still live a very urban life at Osh, because they're very close to the center of the city anyway. It's densely populated. I met a guy who lives in a house with 24 other people, family members. I mean, it's a small mahala house, but very crowded. So it's a different way of living, I guess, but it's also urban. You see, I think people are kind of tired. But if there are any other comments, or maybe we can talk afterwards too.
I agree that Osh is very unique, and it would be really nice to save its uniqueness. I wouldn't like that it becomes something like Bishkek. For example, when you go from Bishkek to Almaty, you don't feel that you left Kyrgyzstan. Yeah? They are quite similar. Of course, there are differences, but they are similar. But it wouldn't be nice if, when you, for example, travel from Almaty through Bishkek and you find yourself in Osh also in a similar kind of city. Yes, and would it be possible to save Osh's uniqueness, but with a Kyrgyz flavor? Yeah. Of course, we cannot go backwards, like we cannot stop this nationalization, unfortunately. But I don't know, maybe such urban geographers, or development geographers could recommend, Kyrgyz state that it would be really nice to save the uniqueness of the city, but at the same time to make it still Kyrgyz, to make Kyrgyz inhabitants happy about that, and maybe explain how it is unique and why it's important.
Yeah. I mean, I think that fundamentally the issue is that there is no public discussion about that, and it's because it's completely taboo to discuss Uzbek-Kyrgyz relations at any sort of public or mayoral event or anything like that. So I've sat through long meetings at the mayor's office about urban development and what are the problems facing our city, and no one mentions anything about ethnic tension. And I think that talking about the future of the city would be a really cool way to do it, actually. I mean, I wish that I was an urban activist and I have so many ideas, but I don't think that my ideas are the ones that that motivate other people. I don't know if that answers your question entirely, but I mean, I do think that I think that the sort of multicultural character of the city is what makes it so great. And that doesn't mean only the Uzbek culture, right? I mean, it's a combination of both. So finding ways to express that in the visual landscape, and I don't know, I think that would be great.
Just a very short question. Among the people you discuss in Osh and you walk with, or you try to, I mean, it somehow very relates to Emil's question about the true authentic Armenians. Are these people who have traveled elsewhere? I mean, Tashkent to Bishkek, farther away, and or are these people who have spent all their life in Osh? But I mean, when you try to walk with them, what do you discuss?
Well, first of all, almost everybody has spent time abroad somewhere. So it's your parents are, I think, an anomaly. I mean, or a small subset of the population, maybe a group that I haven't met yet somehow. But it's also, in my methods, people like your parents are not the people I'm going to meet. And I'm actually growing more and more aware of that already, but I think I'm starting to connect this now more, because on a walking interview, I'm not walking through an apartment building or on a tour of neighborhood. I'm not, if people are outside, I will encounter them, but if they're inside, I won't. So maybe I need to start knocking on doors. I think people will probably not like that very much. I do have the benefit of working in a city that is not saturated with researchers, which is great. I have friends who work in Nepal who can't get anyone to talk to them anymore because it's such an over-researched city, and I'm the only researcher I know in Russia right now, which shocks me. So hopefully you all can encourage more people to come to Osh and do more research. It's lonely. But your question was about so everybody has traveled somewhere, whether they've been working in Russia for some time, or a lot of the younger elite that I have met through the NGO Youth Bush, for example, have been on study tours and things to European places, and So were you asking because you were thinking what did
just because I was wondering if this uniqueness of Osh is a kind of need no one questions. Is it unique just because it's unique,
right.
or is this uniqueness sort of reflective exercise. I mean, you've been elsewhere, and
right.
when you say that Osh is unique, it's because you have experienced it as unique.
Well, I think that the fact that so many people are working abroad but investing in their homes in Osh is, I don't know if that's a sign of Osh being unique, but it's certainly a sign that people want to return. They see it as their future. And I started to think about Osh as sort of two overlapping geographies. So you have a group of people who are working abroad and sending money home and plan to return, and they're building a life for themselves back in Osh. And it's like a sedentary, we're coming back, we're going to be here. And then there's this other part of Osh that, it's a student city. It's really quiet when the universities are closed. And there are so many young people in the streets of Osh. It's unbelievable. And those people are not there to stay. And I think that these neighborhoods like AUCA, that used to be a prestigious urban place that you got an apartment, right? Because you worked at the factory, or you got it because of whatever your profession was. Those are turning into these neighborhoods where poor people from villages in LA are coming and renting, or students are living, and 6 students to a 2-bedroom apartment. So the character of that neighborhood has changed. It's changing a lot. So then you have this really mobile, it's just like a jumping pad for another place. I would prefer to live in Bishkek. I would prefer to live in Almaty. That's where all my family lives. I'm stuck here because my parents live here. I'm the youngest son. I have to stay. But if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be here either. There's these 2 things going on at the same time.
Yeah, but it's still a dynamic city, I think, and I think there will be people who will be willing to stay and to come to work in Osh. Huh? I grew up in Java, but I was born and grew up in Java.
I think this kind of uniqueness of Osh has a very distinct culinary aspect, right? That's kind of part of the brand business, the food in Osh, because every time I see people go to Osh and they post pictures on this amazing food.
That's true, because one of the things I ask in interviews is, can you describe Osh? And 50% of the people I talk to describe the food of Osh. They don't tell me what it looks like, who lives there, anything. They talk about the food. So it's funny that you say that.
Yeah, it's just an observation, maybe. That's another relevant one. But yeah, I was just also thinking, kind of, up to what Ramiro said about, this authenticity and things like that. What often happens also is this process of gentrification, right? That where this unique atmosphere of a certain neighborhood, or even the whole city, becomes capitalized in a way, right? When ethnic neighborhoods become new kind of trendy places for the wealthy to settle in, things like that, right? And so in Bishkek, for instance, these former factories become creative spaces, so the former factory of medical equipment becomes this office space for designers and people who work in advertising. So there's kind of this partial gentrification of spaces is happening here, but it doesn't seem like
two comments. One is that some of the former factories there's a bowling alley in one. There's some football fields in another, but I don't think they're trying to use these things. And then, what I'm really surprised about when I walk out into these, what I would think of as like remote neighborhoods or districts is how much wealth there is. I mean, amazing. I mean, it's really these impressive houses and cars and I don't know. I mean, it looks like a very wealthy suburban American neighborhood in some of these areas. And it's both in Uzbek and Kyrgyz neighborhoods. It's not unique to one group or the other. But there is a lot of money in Rush actually, and you wouldn't know it by sticking to the downtown areas or the tourist areas. You get back in those little roads, and there are some very fancy houses. Yeah.
It's also very possible nowadays with all these monuments. In some ways I don't agree with the mirror because like the way she talked about making more Kyrgyz and so these monuments they can
not more Kyrgyz, I meant to keep authenticity of the city, but since as we saw in the pictures it's getting more Kyrgyz, but I meant that I meant the opposite.
Yeah, actually as a Ashani, I also feel quite bad about this monuments because they look very aggressive. And every time they enter the city, they remind you, okay, we are the bosses here. And me myself not being too.
It's not natural, monuments. They are not natural. They don't look natural.
Again, it's very close to sorry, it's misunderstood. I am also for the authenticity of the city. It used to be more subtle.
What I would like to do is someday to sit you down and make you imagine what will be an authentic Kyrgyz city.
And I think this talk also about what's natural in the cities is very interesting because the city by definition is produced,
I think the Kyrgyz are the people who make Osh authentic because otherwise it would have been just a boring Uzbek town.
What's another interesting thing is that many Kyrgyz people have told me, I was born here, but it's the new Kyrgyz who are the problem. Like, they are the ones who are uncultured and uneducated and rude, and, they're the ones from Alai who are the problem. So this is where I think that, if you get away from seeing things only in ethnic terms and think about class, and the way that the city is developing through investment. I don't think that most multi-story apartment buildings are desirable places to live. Actually, most people don't want to live in them, and many of them are in really bad condition. So,
When I was mentioning about authenticity and to keep that, I just remembered a comment from one friend from Uzbekistan. She lived in Tashkent. When she was in Osh, she mentioned that she does not feel that she is not in Uzbekistan. She feels like that she does not feel that she is outside of Uzbekistan. She feels that she is in an Uzbek city. But since from the Soviet Union, and in the post-Soviet times, it is changing, it's getting more, it was made more Soviet by building all these buildings, high-stored houses and other buildings, and in the post-Soviet time, it's getting more Kyrgyzified, and of course, you cannot stop these processes because there was Soviet Union, now it's post-Soviet nation-state Kyrgyz nation-state. But what I mean to keep something from how it was, like before the Soviet Union and before this post-Soviet developments.
Yeah. And I think everyone agrees that it's like these mahalas are really special. Like, people like them. Everybody does. But most curious people don't go to the mahalas either. It's interesting. They say like they're great, but I don't think they enter those neighborhoods very often.
It's quite interesting also how the public spaces have changed perhaps, because you mentioned something about the park, that is like it's supposed to be a public space, but now it's being privatized, or it's turning into something quite commercial, related to weddings, wedding industry. And kind of the sociality of the mahala versus microrayon. Because microrayon and generally like apartment block buildings can be quite social, because they used to have like these courtyards, which was a completely social place where children would play and the neighbors would socialize, and in the apartment block people used to know their neighbors, right? So it's not necessarily due to the nature of the building itself, as maybe some more recent changes that took place.
Actually, maybe you are the right audience to ask this question, because I have been trying to learn more about the privatization process, the privatization of land and property. And are there? I found like some sources published in like the late 90s, but then it seems like there hasn't really been much studied since then about land and property transformation. I'm curious,
Great Hedgen.
Who?
Great Hedgen.
Oh.
From he's still in Zurich. And now
And the other one, what was the anthropologist we had?
I think Balihar Sangera also
Yes,
Balihar Sangera. He was at Kent University. Or maybe not.
Greg.
Great Hedgen. So, his focus was on property. And actually he's done some research in art as well. And he's published.
Thank you. Yes,
Yeah.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you.
Thank you for